What happens when a genius of the automotive industry dares to challenge the giants and ends up caught in one of the most shameful scandals of his time? John DeLorean had it all: fame, money, vision, and a car that promised to be the future. But his story ended in ruin, drugs, and a destroyed reputation. This is the true story of how DeLorean destroyed himself, and how, ironically, his failure ended up becoming immortal. Imagine being one of the youngest and brightest executives at General Motors. You have power, influence, and a guaranteed future at the biggest company in the automotive world. But one day, you decide to leave it all behind. Why? Because you have an idea so big it no longer fits within established limits. John Zachary DeLorean was not just any engineer, charismatic, rebellious, ambitious. He had that strange magnetism that made him stand out in a room of gray-suited executives. At just 40 years old, he had already climbed the ranks to become vice president of GM, and was credited with the success of iconic models like the Pontiac GTO. But despite his success, something didn't fit for him. The industry was stagnant, mass-producing cars without soul, ethics, or a future. And that's where his vision was born: to create the first truly ethical car. A vehicle that was not only fast or attractive, but also safe, sustainable, and honest with its consumers. So, in 1975, he founded his own company, the DeLorean Motor Company, or DMC. His dream was no longer just technical, but almost philosophical. He wanted to prove that it was possible to build a better car, without sacrificing principles or giving in to market pressures. To get his project off the ground, he needed capital, a lot of it. He knocked on doors all over the United States, but the conditions he demanded, creative independence and total control, were too risky for traditional investors. That's when an unexpected offer appeared. The British government, aiming to revitalize the economy of Northern Ireland, made him a tempting proposal. They offered him millions in subsidies and land in the troubled city of Dunmurry in exchange for setting up the factory there. It was a risky move, but in DeLorean's eyes, it seemed like the perfect opportunity: government support, cheap labor, and the chance to make history. And that's exactly what he did. Construction of the plant began in 1978. It was a modern, ambitious factory intended to be a symbol of reconciliation in a divided country. The employees, many of them Catholics and Protestants who would never have sat together before, began assembling a stainless steel dream: the DMC-12. The DMC-12 had a tough mission: to justify its $25,000 price tag, in a market where, for that amount, you could already buy more powerful, reliable cars from well-established brands. So what did DeLorean offer in return? Design, style, exclusivity. And what went wrong? Pretty much everything else. Beneath its shiny steel shell, the DMC-12 hid a French-made V6 engine, shared by Peugeot, Renault, and Volvo, with barely 130 horsepower. The result? A sports car that took more than 10 seconds to go from 0 to 60 miles per hour. For an audience used to the roar of Mustangs and Camaros, that was disappointing. And worst of all, many buyers, seeing its aggressive look, expected much more. When they drove it, they found a car that was neither fast, nor agile, nor fun. Just eye-catching. But the design, on its own, did make an impact. Its creator was Giorgetto Giugiaro, a legend in the world of automotive design, the same person responsible for the Volkswagen Golf and the Lotus Esprit. And that wasn't all. The first models hit the market full of flaws: doors that got stuck, faulty electrical systems, and assembly problems. Many cars arrived at dealerships with poorly done adjustments or loose parts. Some mechanics even said that working on a DMC-12 was like operating a Swiss watch, without an instruction manual. DeLorean, ever the optimist, insisted that mistakes were just part of the process for any new car company. And in theory, he was right. But time was not on his side. The defective cars hurt the brand's reputation, sales never took off, and investors started to have doubts. They produced 8,600 units of the DMC-12, but barely 6,000 were sold. The rest piled up like silent monuments to failure. Ironically, the DMC-12 needed a time machine but to go back and fix the mistakes. Before launch, when John DeLorean agreed to set up his plant in Dunmurry, Northern Ireland, it wasn't out of whim or romanticism. It was a strategic move. The British government offered him more than $120 million in subsidies and incentives to create jobs in a region devastated by the conflict between Catholics and Protestants. The idea was noble and risky. During the first few months, everything seemed to work. The factory employed more than 2,500 people, which helped stabilize the region. But with the change of government in the United Kingdom and the arrival of Margaret Thatcher, the situation became much more complicated. Thatcher was not in favor of subsidizing foreign companies, and to her, DMC was not a promise. It was an expense with no return. So she started to put on the pressure. More results, less rhetoric. John, who had once negotiated with a more flexible government, was now facing a tough, cold leader who was unwilling to keep funding a project that wasn't generating visible profits. And the pressure kept mounting. Production costs were skyrocketing, the factory was far from reaching its targets, and the market in the United States, where the DMC-12 was expected to shine, simply wasn't responding. Even worse, the remote location, lack of manufacturing experience, and constant assembly errors turned the factory into a powder keg. Everything was interconnected. A defective car in New York meant less confidence in the Dunmurry plant, which led to more pressure from London, less funding, and more desperation in DeLorean's offices. And that desperation, as often happens in tragic stories, opened the door to unthinkable decisions. With the Dunmurry factory running at half speed, unsold units piling up, and investors turning their backs, DeLorean needed money, fast. He had tried everything, new rounds of funding, negotiations with the British government, even business partnerships. Nothing worked. Every door he knocked on slammed shut even harder. That's when a man showed up with an offer. Apparently, he had access to a network that could generate more than $24 million in a short time. But there was one condition. The money came from drug trafficking. What happened next sounds like something out of a spy movie, but it was real. John agreed to meet, and everything was recorded on video. In that recording, which was later made public, you can see him taking part in the conversation as if it were just any other investment. "This business is as good as selling cars," he said with a forced smile. What he didn't know was that it was all part of an undercover FBI operation. On October 19, 1982, John DeLorean was arrested and charged with conspiracy to distribute drugs. The news exploded like an atomic bomb in headlines around the world. Images of the creator of the car of the future being handcuffed circled the globe within hours. The scandal was immediate, brutal, and final. Although 2 years later he was found not guilty, thanks to his lawyers proving he had been the victim of a setup, the damage was already done. His image, which until then had been that of a glamorous rebel, an icon of entrepreneurship and innovation, was forever tarnished. The trust of partners, clients, and the public evaporated. And with it, the entire company. 1 week after his arrest, the DeLorean Motor Company officially declared bankruptcy. It was the final chapter of a story that had begun with so much idealism and passion and ended in lawsuits, debt, and public shame. The dream of an ethical car turned into a legal nightmare. Some partially assembled cars were completed thanks to a contractor company, but official production stopped for good. The employees were laid off, the factory closed its doors, and all hopes were extinguished. John DeLorean, for his part, spent the following years entangled in legal battles, financial troubles, and failed projects. He died in 2005, never reaching the top again. They say legends never die. And even though the DeLorean Motor Company collapsed in 1982, its most ambitious creation, the DMC-12, was about to be reborn, not because of its horsepower, but because of its on-screen presence. Because sometimes, a complete failure in the market can turn into a cultural icon over time. In 1985, just 3 years after the bankruptcy, director Robert Zemeckis and producer Steven Spielberg needed a car for their new science fiction movie. They didn't want just any car. They needed a time machine that looked different, futuristic, almost alien. And then they saw it, the DeLorean DMC-12, with its shiny body and gull-wing doors, looked like it was made for time travel. That's how one of Hollywood's most iconic pairings was born, the DeLorean as the time machine in Back to the Future. Neither John DeLorean nor his critics could have imagined that the same car, once criticized for low power and poor quality, would become a generational symbol. From that moment on, the DMC-12 stopped being a commercial failure and transformed into a cultural time capsule. Fans from all over the world started searching for units. Enthusiast clubs were founded. Even museums began to display it as a historical piece. And over the years, its rarity made it more valuable. What was once an unsellable car is now priced at over $40,000, depending on its condition and mileage. Some restored or modified models with original parts can even reach $100,000. Nostalgia, as always, has a value that the original numbers could never predict. But the story doesn't end there. In recent years, a new company that acquired the name and some assets of the original has tried to revive the DeLorean legacy with a modern electric version, the Alpha 5, with a sleek design, gull-wing doors, and updated technology. This new iteration aims to bridge the past with the future. It's still too early to know if it will achieve anything beyond paying tribute to the original, but its very existence proves an undeniable truth. DeLorean never really disappeared. And what about John? His ending was far less glamorous. After the trial, he lost most of his fortune. He faced more lawsuits, tried to launch other cars, all unsuccessfully, and ended up living in a small house far from the spotlight he loved so much. He died in 2005 at the age of 80, having gone from magnate to martyr and from villain to legend. Because even though the story of DeLorean is a business cautionary tale, it's also a powerful reminder. The fall can be spectacular, but sometimes, what you built with passion finds a new purpose where you least expect it. John DeLorean wanted to change the automotive world with a revolutionary ideal. And even though his dream was shattered by bad decisions, an unforgettable scandal, and market pressure, he ended up achieving something very few ever do, becoming eternal. The DMC-12 isn't seen on the streets, it's seen in memories. And you, who have made it this far, now know that behind the shine of that stainless steel lies a complex, human, and deeply fascinating story.